Okay, imagine you're right there in the courtroom. It's deep into this really high-stakes trial, and a former assistant takes the stand.
Yeah, and this isn't just, another witness. The source material we're looking at today suggests this was a potentially pivotal day.
Right. It lays out these really serious allegations, a chaotic, maybe even terrifying work environment, personal abuse claims.
Exactly, and that's the scene painted in these sources we've got for this deep dive. It really hones in on the testimony of this key witness, they call her Mia, in the Sean Diddy Combs proceedings.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. Cut through all the legal jargon, all the noise, and pull out the most important nuggets, the key details, the insights from these sources.
Mm-hmm.
We want to give you a clear, concise picture of what happened that day in court and some of the related news, too.
We'll start with the heavy stuff, the serious allegations Mia made during her testimony.
Oh.
It paints well, a pretty stark picture. But then we'll look at how the defense pushed back. Hard, using her own words, her own posts from the past. It gets complicated.
Definitely sounds like it.
And finally, we'll just quickly touch on a couple of other things that came up in court and one related news item.
Okay, let's get into it. So, Mia, she was a former assistant to Combs, and according to these sources, her testimony was partly there to back up some of what Cassie Ventura had previously alleged.
Right. She described the whole work atmosphere under Combs as, well, toxic, unpredictable, deeply unsettling. She even used the word terrifying.
Wow.
And it wasn't just about the general vibe. Her testimony included some really disturbing personal allegations against Combs himself.
This is where it gets quite intense. She talked about specific incidents, one alleged sexual assault during his 40th birthday party at a hotel penthouse.
Yeah. She testified he gave her vodka shots, then kissed her. She said she just froze, couldn't process it, felt completely taken advantage of.
And didn't she later suggest she might have been drugged?
She did indicate that later, yeah. Though the sources clarify, she didn't explicitly say, I was drugged while on the stand, but she believes that might have been the case.
Okay.
And beyond that specific incident, she also described alleged physical violence. Things like him throwing objects at her, throwing her against a wall, even throwing her into a pool once.
Threw her in a pool.
That's what she claimed. And also hurling a bowl of spaghetti, taking her phone. She even said he threw a computer at her at one point.
It sounds like intense anger and control issues being alleged. The phone thing, too, that sounds controlling.
Definitely. She testified he borrowed her phone, then wouldn't give it back, and allegedly threatened her, saying he'd use anything incriminating he found against her.
And her testimony wasn't just about what allegedly happened to her, right? She also talked about witnessing things.
Yes, she claimed she personally saw Combs abusing Cassie Ventura on certain occasions.
So the prosecution's angle here, according to the sources, is that this all fits into a larger picture. They're arguing Combs used his business, his influence, his whole setup, really, to cover up alleged abuse.
Exactly. Things like sexual trafficking, coercion, violence. That's what the prosecution's alleging he covered up.
And how does Mia's testimony specifically support the kind of case they're building, like the RIC charges?
Well, from the prosecution's viewpoint, as laid out here, her testimony helps build that framework. It helps paint a picture, allegedly, of Combs running a kind of criminal enterprise.
Okay.
Using his power, his staff, his companies, not just for, music and business, but to actually enable and hide alleged crimes. It supports claims of a pattern of abuse, the alleged assaults, source drug use, intimidation, violence during her employment. That pattern is key for those enterprise allegations.
Right, so a really damaging account during her direct examination, but then things shifted, the cross-examination.
Big shift.
Yeah.
Once the prosecution rested with her, it was the defense's turn. And Combs' attorney, Brian Steele, went right at her credibility. Head on.
And how did he do that? The sources say he used her own words against her.
Pretty much.
Oh.
Pulled of her past social media posts, emails, texts, even her actions. The strategy was basically to show inconsistencies, to suggest her claims of constant fear didn't match how she acted or communicated back then.
Okay, like what specifically? What kind of posts?
Well, they highlighted posts from years after the alleged abuse she described. Things where she tagged Combs, like one saying, I am Diddy Sack. Photos where she's leaning into him looking friendly. A post from Burning Man saying, take me back.
Wow.
She apparently called him extended family for life in one post. Forever one of my great fans.
Yeah.
Even called him good kind of crazy. It posted photos of him shirtless.
That seems difficult to reconcile with the testimony of terror. What about the video?
Ah, yes, the video. They showed one where Combs was playing a doctor delivering her baby, like a skit. She apparently admitted on the stand it was funny and she was proud to be in it. And they pointed out she promoted his birthday online using hashtags like hashtag happy birthday Diddy, and even one that said hashtag I'm so hot I'm throwing panties at myself.
Okay, that's quite a contrast. Did she have explanations for all this?
She did offer explanations. She said, social media often shows a perfect life even when it's not true. She mentioned his fans followed her, she didn't want her family worried, and promoting him was technically her job.
Right, part of the role.
She also described their dynamic as a cycle, ups and downs,
Mhm.
and said she wasn't always afraid, especially during times when they were acting like best friends.
What about emails or texts? Anything specific there?
Yeah, the defense brought up an email sent after some incident in South Africa. She apparently wrote to Combs, "I'm really sorry, Puff. You know I love you," and said she'd do whatever you want. I love you.
That sounds pretty deferential or even affectionate. How did she explain that one?
Her explanation was basically that she sent it because she worked for him, and pleasing him felt like the only thing that mattered to him at that moment. She said she was stuck, needed an answer about her flight, couldn't afford changes, so she felt pressured.
Okay, trying to smooth things over for practical reasons.
That seemed to be the gist.
Yeah.
The defense also noted she stayed in touch with Combs and his associate Drock even after she stopped working there.
Really? Like, how?
Apparently told Combs, "I love you," after some people they both knew had passed away, and told Drock, "I'm always ready to help y'all out." She testified she said this when she thought he might offer her money. She framed it as trying to play neutral.
Managing the relationship even after leaving.
And her general way of talking to him came up. She basically said, "That's how I speak to him." She presented these communications as trying to manage a scary situation, just wanting it all to go away.
It wasn't just words, though, right? Her actions were questioned, too, like making things for him.
Exactly. The defense brought up a scrapbook she made for his 45th birthday back in 2014. This was years after the alleged abuse started.
A scrapbook?
Yeah, printed articles, highlighted his name, put them in order. And she also organized a birthday video for him, asking other people to send in clips.
Okay, those seem like significant gestures. What was her reasoning for doing those things, given her other testimony?
She said she was young, felt manipulated, and was just trying to survive in that whole environment. She stressed that nobody around her ever seemed bothered by his behavior. Nobody ever flinched, she said.
So normalization?
That's how she framed it. She called it psychological abuse and said she's unpacking all of this now in therapy. She seemed quite emotional about it, saying no one did anything to help her back then.
The defense must have also questioned why she didn't just leave the job if it was so bad.
They did. She testified she didn't feel she could leave or get another job because she was scared of him, scared he'd make sure she couldn't work elsewhere. She mentioned trying to run away once in St. Bart's but couldn't get off the yacht and claimed staff had her passport.
That adds another layer. It's incredibly complex. Did she offer any, overall psychological explanation for why she might act friendly or helpful towards someone she also feared?
She did, and this part is really interesting. According to the sources, she talked about having a logic brain and a trauma brain,
Okay.
and how the trauma brain often takes over, making abusive situations feel normal over time. She described herself as a people pleaser, an empath, a rule follower who tends to take more than maybe other people would. And she also mentioned she forgives people easily.
So, trying to explain the inconsistencies through the lens of trauma response?
That seemed to be her explanation for the seemingly contradictory behavior.
Did the defense directly challenge the frequency of the alleged assaults?
Yes. They asked her point blank if it wasn't true that the sexual assaults didn't happen as often as she claimed. But she held firm. She stated, "What I said in this courtroom is true. I have not lied to anyone at all."
Wow, so a very direct denial there.
Absolutely. The whole cross-examination really laid bare the defense strategy. Use her own documented history to challenge her current story, highlighting the contrast between how things looked on the outside and what she claims she was experiencing internally.
Okay, beyond Mia's testimony, which was obviously the main event described here, what else happened? Any other notable moments from court or related news in the sources?
Just a couple of quick things. One was procedural. The court had to address Combs apparently running out of phone minutes to talk to his lawyer from jail.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just a practical issue. The judge said they'd make sure he had the access he needed to communicate with counsel.
Okay. Anything else from the courtroom itself? Evidence disputes?
There was some discussion about evidence admissibility. The defense wanted to show a video, but it seems there's an issue with when it was disclosed or marked, and the judge ultimately excluded it. Standard courtroom back and forth, it sounds like.
Got it. And what about the speculation on whether Combs might testify himself?
The sources mention a witness offering an opinion on that. Basically said the advice might be not to testify, but that if he did, it could be a chance to uh, humanize his own self to the jury. Pure speculation, though.
Interesting thought. Okay, and then there was something separate outside the trial involving former President Trump.
Yeah, a completely separate news item included in the source material. It reported on comments Trump made in a recent interview. According to the report, he didn't rule out potentially pardoning Combs if he's convicted on the federal sex trafficking charges.
He didn't rule it out. What exactly did the report say he said?
The source quoted him directly. I would certainly look at the facts. If I think someone was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me.
Okay, so just reporting that quote as it appeared in the source material provided, no analysis, just the information.
Exactly. Our job here is just to convey what was in the materials you gave us, sticking to the facts presented.
Right. So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive? It really shows just how incredibly complex this testimony is, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It highlights the challenge, both for the legal system and for anyone following along, of trying to reconcile these very serious, very disturbing allegations of abuse with evidence, like her own past messages or actions, that, on the surface seems to contradict the narrative of constant fear.
Yeah, it puts a spotlight on those alleged power dynamics, the psychological impact the witness described, and just the difficulty of matching up a public image with these private alleged realities.
It's a lot to process.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, drawing from Mia's own words in the source material, this idea of having a logic brain and a trauma brain.
Yeah, that was striking.
Think about that. How navigating trauma, survival, especially over time, might lead to behaviors that don't look linear or consistent or, frankly, easily understandable from the outside. What does that perspective tell us, perhaps, about the sheer complexity of human behavior when someone is allegedly trapped in an abusive dynamic? Something to really mull over.